This conference will now be recorded.
Well, welcome everybody to one more edition of Let's Talk Business. Today we have joining us Diane Powell from the Community and Family Builders. And we also have my co host, JoAnn Forrester, uh, kindly known as the Empress of Biz. And I'm always surprised how many pots JoAnn is stirring because she works with entrepreneurs, she works with small business, she works with the URA, she works with the banks, she works with everybody. But today in particular, we're going to be talking with and meeting with Diane, and I'll let JoAnn introduce her. I won't steal any of that thunder. And I'll just quickly introduce myself too. My name is Sal Acosta. I am a business broker. I'm a little bit more focused than JoAnn. I basically help people buy and sell businesses in the Pittsburgh area and now through the wonders of video chat all over the world. So, JoAnn, would you like to introduce our guest, Diane?
Yes, I would. And by the way, I'm the Empress, but my friend is the Duke. So I want you to know the Empress has a Duke here. Hello, Diane. This is Diane Powell. She is Director of Community. She's founder and Director of the Community and Family Builders. I have known Diane, I guess at least 10 years, and she has been involved in many projects. Her current interest and working very hard at it is the subject that we're going to be talking about, providing support for those who are involved in dementia and Alzheimer's care. There is a lot of misinformation. There is vital information that we need, and I am very pleased to be having as our guest Diane Powell. Welcome, Diane.
Thank you, JoAnn. It's an honor to be here today, and I'm excited to chat with you and Salvador about all things Alzheimer's and dementia and caregiving.
Well, so Diane, let me ask you first of all, and as I mentioned before we started recording, I can relate to this because I'm at a stage in life where I'm going through this with my parents and my aunt, so it's a topic near and dear to my heart. But how did you get involved with this? Was it a family situation? Did you just recognize a need of all the things that you could help and that the community needs help with? Why did you pick this one?
Right. For two reasons. I have had prior experience with caregiving with Alzheimer's, an individual in a family member who had mild dementia. And I also had a close friend who came down with the disease in her early 70s. And her decline was so rapid and shocking. And at the time, we missed so many of the signals that after her death, when an opportunity came from the Alzheimer's Association, they approached me and asked that I get involved. I was willing to do so based on my prior experience and just a desire to try to make a difference and to ensure that other families wouldn't necessarily have to go through what I witnessed and observed in this particular case.
Okay. Now let me ask you this because I want to take this at a real low level because frankly I still remember a couple years ago how confused and how disinformed I was. Okay. So could you briefly start by saying maybe the different levels of care that there are? So for example, I know correct me if I'm wrong, at the very low level there's independent living, then there's assisted living, then there's nursing homes, then there's even a higher level which I think is where Alzheimer's might fall in, which is called memory care, which the way I understand it, it's a higher level of care even than a nursing home, and of course that also translates into more expensive, and we'll talk about that. But could you talk about the different levels of care, and then maybe even some pointers for the caregivers to identify what the appropriate level of care is for that person or that family member or that loved one?
Sure. But before I address that, would you mind if I just shared a few statistics on what's happening with dementia in the state of Pennsylvania and nationally, and why we feel it's so important to get information out to individuals who are maybe suffering with the disease and their families and caregivers? Because it's really having a drastic impact on families. Here in Pennsylvania, more than 282,000 individuals have been diagnosed with the disease. And those are the ones that are fortunate because they have been diagnosed. Countless others have gone undiagnosed but are symptomatic and are struggling to cope with memory loss, inability to perform the tasks required for daily living, not necessarily bathing, maybe perhaps not eating properly, not taking medications as prescribed. So many people are living to some degree in an isolated state and just struggling and coping with these symptoms that have gone undiagnosed. And we feel it's very, very important to get the word out to people first, that they begin to recognize the warning signs and not ignore them. And more importantly, how critical it is to get early detection. That helps not only the person with the disease, but the family members as well, who have the task of, trying to manage their care and safekeeping. So we've made a concerted effort to do workshops in the community that are free and open to the public. We have partnered with a number of faith organizations and have put on workshops with their members, as well as community organizations. But our goal is to help people not only recognize the warning signs of the disease, but to recognize how important early detection is, to begin to adapt healthy lifestyles changes, even though they are maybe aging, how important it is to maintain a healthy diet, to continue to exercise, and to, try to preserve your brain health because it's vitally important for seniors. And we are working actively with the Alzheimer's Association and other community organizations to get the word out, particularly with the African American community.
I'd like to add something that I've been doing a bit of research due to not my particular problem, but I've had family members, and also having been a traumatic brain injury. Uh, some of the symptoms are very similar to what is happening in dementia. And fortunately, with TBI, with therapy, and also in early stages of dementia and Alzheimer's, you can do a lot of things to help bring back or help the person cope with the memory loss. I was in my research, I was like, we actually have every day. They didn't think brain cells replace themselves, but they do. From 700 to 1,500 cells a day are manufactured in our brain. And the interest, and now the research is, starting to zero in how can they do that? Because with Alzheimer's and dementia, you need to be able to replace those healthy cells. You need to replace the bad cells with the healthy cells. So the good news is, with the things that Diane's talking about and we'll talk about, you can't cure it, but you can mitigate it a bit and prolong the independence.
Okay, excellent. So, can you give us a couple of tips to figure out when a person is starting to approach the stage where they need help? And I guess what I'm trying to say is we all forget our passwords. We all forget where we put our keys. Sometimes we all forget where we parked at the mall. how can you distinguish, let's just say, a normal level of forgetfulness from a level that starts to rise to now you need to start thinking about medication or therapy or additional help or additional resources?
Yeah. the, the the examples that you shared are normal parts of aging. Certainly, as we age, our brain and bodies begin to slow down and process information differently. So it's normal to occasionally forget a password or forget that you had an appointment that particular afternoon, but then you remember that it's on the calendar and you reschedule. Those are all normal signs of aging. But at the point when memory loss begins to interfere with your ability to live independently and affect your daily activity, that's when it should become evident that you need to seek medical diagnosis, meaning when you repeatedly forget appointments over a period of time, or if you're in conversation with a friend or loved one and they share a story with you, and a minute later you've forgotten what they said and you're asking them to repeat it, or you're repeating yourself over and over and over again as if in a loop. Those are signs of something going on cognitively that needs to be addressed. Sometimes we'll notice that lack of bathing and personal hygiene can be a really strong indicator that something's going on that should be addressed with our loved one. Other times they may be, you'll notice like drastic mood changes where the person was normally low key and pleasant. Now you're beginning to see angry outburst and frustration, and you may even experience them begin to swear where they never used to do that before. Those are signs that something has gone awry.
Okay. How much can be mitigated by either technology or organization? And I think some people are just inherently maybe a little bit more organized, a little more systematic. So, for example, I'll tell you again, I'm going through all this with my own mother, and I've tried to get her to write everything down on a notebook. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten her a really nice notebook with a pen and said, "Hey, listen here, just keep it next to your side. And, if you need to do something, write it down. Or if you want to tell me something and you don't want to forget, write it down." And frankly, it's been a losing battle. But is that something worth trying?
Well, it can be, but depending on the type of dementia that the person is suffering, that the dementia itself may affect that person's ability to process information, to be organized. It may affect their ability to converse. They may forget words or have difficulty communicating. In other instances, um, depending on the severity of the disease, they may forget colors. And when they're driving, they may become confused about the signage on the roads, things that normally would just come with out of habit. They may forget because in the instance of Alzheimer's disease, brain cells are dying. But in the case of dementia, which is the broad category to describe memory loss and language and behavioral impairment, the person just may not be able to function the way they used to.
Well, let me ask you one last question, and I'll turn it over to JoAnn. But you just again hit another kind of spot that's very related to my experience, and to a lot of people. I've talked to a lot of people. Everybody struggles with the same issue. First, how do you tell it's time for them to stop driving? Is it they're getting lost? Is it they can't find the car at the mall and they're calling security? Is it they're you know bumping the car, scratching the car, fender benders all the time? So first, because again, we all get into fender benders, right? And
Right.
hopefully they're not serious. And sometimes we forget where we parked the car and we got to walk around and look for it. But so how do you make that determination that, hey, now it's time to really stop driving and turn in the keys? And then two, which is I think even harder, when you make that determination, how do you have that conversation? How do you convince them? How do you persuade them? Because everybody that I've talked to that is going through that with their parents, it's the rare one that says, "Yeah, I agree. Fine. Here's my keys. Let's talk about public transit or Uber or something." And most of them want to keep that independence, and I get it. Um, anyway, how do you deal with all that?
Well, that's why it's so important as a family member. If you're observing subtle changes in a loved one's behavior or personality, that it's important to have a discussion with them about what you may have observed and how concerning it is for you, and to ask perhaps, have they noticed changes in themselves? Or is there something that has changed medically with them? Are they taking different medication? Has something else developed that you may not be aware of? Most important thing I would say to individuals and family is to not ignore the subtle symptoms, but to go to a doctor and share what you have observed. Be very specific about the behaviors, the changes that you've noticed, and ask for an assessment. It doesn't take a great deal of time for a primary care physician to make an assessment. They may recommend medication for what you're describing. They may order additional tests, but more than anything, families tend to ignore what they're seeing and wait for a prolonged period of time, when if they are proactive and share with their loved one what they observe happening, it's easier to negotiate behavioral changes with your loved one once it has been officially diagnosed by a physician.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Yes, it does. Yes.
Okay.
One of the things that I'm laughing because I can remember when my mother was driving. Honest to God, she'd take the middle of the road, Sal and Diane. And that was it. And everybody just got out of the way. Here comes Gloria. Whoop, get out of the way. Fortunately, um, it was, I had a talk with her, and it wasn't easy for me. In fact, I actually had a good friend with me because they won't often listen to family. And that having another person who they're close to, who sees what you're worried about and concerned about, uh, also helps. So with mom, we were able to, mom, when you drive straight down the middle of the block, you're on you're on each side of the road. I'm worried not only about you, but I'm worried that you'll hurt someone else, and that got her. And then I got the doctor on my side who, and I said, let's talk to the doctor. And to her, the doctor was God. And then we were able to. She gave up her keys easily. But it's from my viewpoint, and I know you've seen this. Often family needs additional help to get the message across. Am I on the right track, Diane?
I agree 100%. Um, and it's a experience that many caregivers are challenged with, and the burden can feel overwhelming for some as you try to the difficulty of balancing work life, your own family life, you're dealing with your spouse, and then perhaps dealing with an aging parent can feel overwhelming. But it's important for family members to honestly weigh in and assess what they are observing and try to garner support from all of the family members to help manage this situation rather than letting the burden fall on just one individual.
which often happens. You have a once a month group for caregivers. Would you want to talk about that?
Sure, we have an exceptional group of people who gather on a monthly basis online. And we not only share the experiences that each of them are coping with, but they share information and resources and tactics that they've tried that have worked effectively with their patient and what have you. But we meet online once a month. We try to give, JoAnn and I have facilitated sessions, little mini lessons on coping with difficult behaviors, managing medication, all the issues that come up in the day-to-day struggle to manage someone who has the disease. We try to do a little mini lesson and focus on that and share some information that typically has been well received, and caregivers say that it has been helpful in teaching them how to manage difficult behaviors.
How do people find out about that, Diane?
We have a website, www.communityandfamilybuilders.com, but we also, you can email me at communityfamilybuilders@gmail.com, and I would be happy to send a flyer out to you so that interested people can register for the workshop.
And that occurs when?
That's usually a fourth Thursday of every month at 2 p.m.
So the upcoming one is April 25th.
Right.
Okay. So can we put that information on? I know you put information on the on your podcast. Can you put that there?
Absolutely. We'll put a link to the website and the specific date of the meeting for anybody that's listening and wants to participate. They can just look in the description of the podcast and find that information. So yes, we'll do that absolutely. And so Diane, let me ask you maybe sort of a compound question, kind of related. Um, I think most people would want to keep their family member, their loved one at home for as long as they can. I think that's natural. But could you also maybe give a little bit of pointers or tips or tricks of when that really starts to become impractical, impossible, maybe not the right thing to do, and not the right thing to do from two perspectives, right? One is the perspective of the caregiver that maybe getting burned out, maybe getting overwhelmed, maybe simply just doesn't have the skills to provide care at the level that is now necessary. And then also for the person that needs the help and needs the service may not be receiving it because, again, that person may have to leave to go to work or may just not have the background, the skills, whatever. And the second part of the compound question is, if it becomes necessary for them to go somewhere else to again, some type of memory care facility, nursing home, whatever the case may be, frankly, because everybody I talk to is in the same boat, and maybe there's not an answer to this, but how do they pay for it? Does Medicare pay or help or contribute? Does Medicaid pay, help, or contribute some other resources? Or what do you do when you can't have them at home anymore from a financial perspective?
Right. There are several responses to what you've just asked me. The majority of people are caring for their loved ones at home. And to help supplement what each individual caregiver is doing on a daily basis, which can range from paying someone's bills to preparing meals for them to laundering their clothes to helping them bathe, it's intense. It's very challenging. So for some individuals, I would recommend that they contact the Allegheny County Senior Hotline and try to arrange for in-home help where paid caregivers can come into the home and assist with light meal preparation, perhaps do laundry, perhaps sit with your loved one for several hours while you engage in other activities. Now, those services are available throughout Allegheny County, but it's a fee, it's on a sliding fee scale. So it's based on an individual's income. So some people, because of their income, low income requirements, they're not, they don't have to pay. But others, based on their income, would have to pay an hourly rate for that caregiver to come into the home. Now, at the point where the caregiving just becomes so totally overwhelming that the caregiver begins to feel burned out, that's usually the point when a family member begins to seek out alternative placement. And those can range anyway from a memory care facility where there's some independence, but 24-hour a day care, to assisted living, or final option would be a nursing home, which as the disease really progresses and the behavior declines, your loved one may require around the clock care, intensive care, even feeding, assistance with bathing, getting in and out of the bed. At that point, they're eligible for nursing home placement. And again, it depends on an individual's income. Medicare pays a portion of these costs, but the majority of it will come from a person's personal savings and retirement income.
We're having a workshop, or you're having a workshop in May. Would you talk about that briefly?
Well, on May 16th, we're having an online workshop to kind of give caregivers some of the tools and the information that they need to navigate this whole process. Because when you're burdened with caregiving, you're not that inclined to kind of search out all the medical options that are available, the social service agencies that are out there. So we're trying to put people in touch with some of the key organizations and institutions that can provide some of the in-home help, or if placement is needed, here's a facility that they could consider placing their loved one in. So we're going to have people from the Alzheimer's Association, the UPMC Shady Side Senior Care Institute, the Benedum Senior Care Institute, Community Life, and the Jewish Community Center. They have a whole wealth of resources, um, programs, and information that will help, allay some of the burden on the day-to-day challenges of caregiving.
And I don't know if you know this answer. I know with some conditions that people, family members or close family member, friend can be paid to take care of someone who has a child or an adult who has certain conditions. Is that available for those of us who have to deal with taking care of a parent? And we have a couple people who have to leave their jobs. Is that available yet through Medicaid or any of the special programs and
I
any of the
believe it's available through Medicaid for income eligible individuals. Yes.
Okay, but they have to be people who are on Medicaid, and so anybody above that level is pushed into having, uh, well, they have to use all their resources, right?
again, Medicare pays a portion, but there are limits to their responsibility, and the remainder comes from, yes, your own personal savings and retirement.
And by the way, I want to mention something because there's a lot of people that are not aware of this and then get blindsided and surprised at the end. A lot of people, when they have a family member and Medicaid starts to provide all these benefits and all these services, they say, oh my God, this is great. Medicaid is helping out. They're providing all these services. They're providing all these benefits. But they don't know there's a thing called the Medicaid estate recovery, and different states are more aggressive than others. But I know Pennsylvania in particular, Ohio in particular, as an examples, tend to be fairly aggressive with that recovery. And Diane, you can expand and clarify, but basically my understanding is when that person passes away and Medicaid has provided certain level of benefits, they look to recover the money they gave out, and that may include, for example, if the person had a house, putting a lien on that house and trying to get money out of the sale of that house. So
Well,
again,
usually a lien is placed on the house, but as long as a family member resides in the home, they won't process the lien or try to repossess the property. So anyone going into a placement situation, meaning putting an individual into personal care or memory care or nursing home, really needs to do a financial assessment so that they can weigh the options and make sound decisions financially on what it's going to cost and what are the long-term impacts of this decision.
Yeah. Will that be discussed in the workshop, or is that going to be another workshop?
Well, we hope to do future workshops where more and more of these kinds of predicaments are exposed and addressed. And I do know that the state of Pennsylvania has assembled a consortium of sort to begin to tackle some of the issues that families and caregivers are experiencing, not just with Alzheimer's and dementia, but long-term placement. And what type of burden does that place on the family? And what types of remedies can we come up with to help support families so that they're not so financially strained? I do know that Medicaid will cover some of the out-of-pocket expenses that family members have to spend for day-to-day care. Um, I believe Medicare is also looking at some of those expenses as well.
So this is really an important subject that whether I'm fortunate in my family, other things happen, but boy, they keep their memory forever. They can
Yeah.
remember, they can remember what I did when I was 3 years old. And I was a typical little red hair child, which meant I have a list this long of things I did bad.
oh, let me tell you, JoAnn, every time I tell my mother not to drive, the first thing she goes about the time that I got into a car accident with her car, and then she tells me that she drives better than I do. So yeah, I mean, some things are just etched in that memory, and they're not going away.
No, they aren't. And that
Very
trouble
true.
is, we got a list like this, really big one. Um, what I'm fascinated by what can be done and often isn't done. We've been putting together these PowerPoints together in the research. I was digging away this morning, and I just heard that, and I got to verify this again, but that sugar can have a really negative impact on people who are dealing with Alzheimer's and dementia. The
There
diet
is a diabetes connection, definitely.
Yeah. The diet is extremely important to a nutritious diet can be a good good aid for combating, or you may have it, but it doesn't have to increase so rapidly. I was just amazed when I was reading that report. Then I was
Yeah,
going around looking at boxes of, there's so much sugar, and I think I'm doing right. And so much sugar in my cereal, so much sugar in my yogurt, you know?
sugar and sodium and all the things that clog the arteries and impact our internal organs. We really have to adapt healthy lifestyles, including exercise, meditation, all the things that can be done to improve the way our brain functions and how we age. We really have to pay very careful attention and do all that we can to preserve our health as we age.
Hmm. I know or Sal, I know you have embarked on an exercise program.
Yeah, I'm trying to hit the gym every day. That's the goal. The actual performance is maybe every other day, but it's still better than nothing. I have lost weight, and yeah, trying to balance that with being a little more modest in how I eat. And
Mhm.
but yeah, you're absolutely right. As I recognize as I'm getting older, it's no longer an option. You just have to get yourself in the gym, and you have to be a little more careful with what you eat, and that's just unfortunate, but you got to do it.
Yeah, so I applaud what you're doing and encourage you to continue because it will make a difference.
Because trust me, by the way, here's the only little quick side story I'll say. When I was a kid, and I'm talking about high school, okay, we would go to this place, and it was a pizza place. They'd have like every pizza place, right? The small, the medium, the large, the extra large. Then they had this thing called the Sportsman. And the joke was that if a single person could eat the Sportsman, they'd give you the pizza for free. So I never was able to eat the whole thing, but let me tell you, I tried real hard.
Yeah,
Back in
yeah.
the day, we all did.
Oh, yeah, we
Yeah,
did. Yep.
yeah, but we have to change and adapt as we age, and that's the
Now,
most
Diane, let
important.
me ask you maybe one, I don't know, final question, but because again, I could see this kind of cutting both ways, I'm sure it depends on the particular situation, but now we have the benefit of all kinds of technology. And again, I was looking at this for my mother the other day. I didn't do it, or I should say maybe I haven't done it yet. Uh, But you can get cameras that are incredibly inexpensive. We're talking in the neighborhood of $40 to $100. You connect them to the Wi-Fi, and then if you're working or even if you're in another state, you want to watch the person, your loved one that has dementia or whatever the case may be, you can watch them. So in that sense, it's a great benefit. Obviously, in the other sense, some people will say, well, it's an invasion of privacy. Why are you doing that? Do you really need to do that? And it's got all kinds of technologies where it can detect if they're moving, if they're not moving, if they go to a certain area of the house, whatever. I mean, the again, the you can do all kinds of things with software. Now they're integrating artificial intelligence into it. Where do you come down on all this? Is it a good idea? Is it a bad idea? Is it a good idea in what situations?
It can be very effective, especially if you have a large family and they're scattered. So some individuals live nearby and others are out of state. It's a good way for those individuals who are out of state to share the responsibility of caring for their loved one because they can check in virtually on their parent. They could take a turn and kind of monitor what's happening and still remain, connected and engaged with their parent or loved one. So it can be a very effective tool, and it definitely helps to um, equalize the caregiving burden for rather than having just one person doing everything all the time. Other family members who live outside of the area can engage and weigh in and help.
Okay, excellent.
Mhm.
Well, JoAnn, do you have any additional questions, any topics?
Well, I just want to reiterate that we have a special program coming up in May. We do have Diane has the third week of every month the caregiver support program, and that's I've been part of it. That's a good way to find out techniques. Often the members of the group have techniques that you haven't even thought of. Also, social isolation for not only the person who is experiencing dementia, but the person who actually is in the caring position, they need support. It really is important. Uh, and that this is a good way to get support and not have to leave the house. That's one of the great things about technology and what's happening. Just something through like we can, let's go to meeting. It's a great way. Uh, so Diane, repeat that date and of the May event and or dates that we have stuff coming up.
Our monthly support group session for caregivers is April 25th at 2 p.m. And then we're going to have a caregiver care navigation workshop with experts who are involved in providing support and resources to individuals and families with dementia. So May 16th, 2 p.m., both events will be online. And to register, if you have questions or to register, contact me at communityfamilybuilders@gmail.com.
Well, and again, we'll put that information in the description of today's show so that um, people don't have to write it down. They can just cut and paste from there.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, I'll just wrap it up from my side by saying this. I'm so glad you're doing these forums for the caregivers for two reasons. One is, frankly, sometimes their needs get ignored. We focus a lot on the needs of the person that has a dementia, the Alzheimer's that needs the help and whatever. Uh, but also for myself, and for people that I've worked with, even from a business perspective, just knowing that you're not alone, that the stuff that you're going through, that the situations that you have, that the problems that you have, that the frustrations that you have, other people have, and you're not alone, and you're not crazy, and you're not unique. Just having that realization and that interaction, I think is really really valuable.
I agree. It's a powerful connection where you can feel supported and get some questions answered, or at least be pointed in the direction where you might get help and assistance. All
All right,
Wonderful.
Joanne, any last minute questions or comments before we wrap it up here with Diane?
No, I do want to make the comment that I appreciate what she's doing. I know the impact on people who are working, who own their own business. It's millions of dollars of impact of time that is lost, or employees have to take care of a problem, or a business owner who is trying to run his or her own business is, caught. What do I do? So I think what you're doing is very important, and was certainly a very appropriate for the Let's Talk Business show. Thank you, Sal. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Diane, for joining us. We appreciate you giving us your tips and tricks and shedding light and on all this. That again, I myself, I'm working through this. I think a very significant portion of the population, like you mentioned at the beginning, some of the statistics are working through this, and again, it's such a burden. A lot of times people decide that they want to be an entrepreneur or self-employed or buy a small business because it's going to give them the flexibility to then deal with these personal situations, and that's true. But like JoAnn was saying, running a small business is a big time commitment, and then taking care of a family member with Alzheimer's is a big time commitment, and sometimes it evolves to the point that it becomes really really hard to manage both. So again, thank you for joining us and
My
grounding
pleasure.
us a little bit in what we can do.
Thank you very much for the invitation. We'll always be willing to come back again, but hopefully we shared some information that people will find useful and constructive.
All right, thank you both very much.
You're welcome.